Sylvia Plath's poetry. In this instance, looking at the first in the anthology from Ariel called Sheep in Fog, and we'll be looking at the first part of the poem in this instance. You'll need your copy of the poem with you, and we'll be looking to stop the um, screen at some point for you to be able to work on the poem yourself. But let's have a look at the actual poem. Sheep in Fog. The hills step off into whiteness. People or stars regard me sadly. I disappoint them. The train leaves a line of breath. O slow horse, the colour of rust. Hooves, dolorous bells. All morning the morning has been blackening. A flower left out. My bones hold a stillness. The far field melts my heart. They threaten to let me through to a heaven starless and farless, a dark water. So if you look at the poem altogether, it seems to be a little bit intimidating. But if you break it down to smaller units, it becomes a bit more manageable in considering how it works. So let's start with the title itself. 3 words. If you just even look at 3 words, you're able to start to unpack the poem in a way that maybe gives a bit more insight. Firstly, we've got sheep, the domesticated animal. The sense of the pejorative or the payout, if you like, the way that we see being called a sheep might be seen as being somebody who just follows and doesn't necessarily take part in a more active role, somebody who's lost. And then maybe a statement about action. For instance, feeling sheepish, or there's a sense of it being unclear if you're a little bit foggy headed about the piece. And then the word fog itself, literally mist on the ground. But then we've got this notion of threat, of loss of clarity, the loss of one's bearings, uncertainty along the way. But if we combine these two concepts like sheep and fog separately, we end up with a combination of the landscape and the thing, the sheep or the person who's speaking in this particular instance. We put it together, we've got 3 words, probably perhaps the most simplest idea in the whole piece, sheep in fog. It's got an object and a sense of the place, a subject, sorry, and the sense of the place that we see. It's the simplest statement possible. And note it sounds a bit like a painting or a sketch, as if you've walked into a gallery and you're seeing this on the wall. Here's a picture of sheep in fog, which of course leads us to ideas of what on earth do we think we're seeing. So what insights might we get from this? There's a double vagueness here. Is it this notion of white and grey, the confusion that might be present in the poem coming forwards? Do you think perhaps that looking at this, that the sense of clarity is going to be compromised, that we're going to struggle both in terms of the person speaking in the poem, but also ourselves to make meaning and make clarity in this particular instance? Also, is this symptomatic of how the poem is about to follow is going to be hidden and have things that are covered in places that can't be discerned? So let's look at the first part. Sheep in fog. The hills step off into whiteness. People or stars regard me sadly. I disappoint them. If we go to that first part, we look at this idea of what's called a definite article. In other words, it could be are hills, or not are hills, but hills. But by saying it's the definite article, we have this sense that they're specific. They've been identified. And then we see this idea of personification that normally would normally associate hills actually moving or having an action. Um, but here we've got this notion of their personification as if they are perhaps a bit later on, like the train, stepping off from that train itself into something unknown. And then the whiteness itself, the unknown, unsure, unclear, this sense of into the unknown, the void, the mist itself following and encompassing everything. It's indeterminate with people or stars. Think about it. It's just two groups of things. One group of people, one group of stars. Neither is particularly identified in comparison to that earlier part with the notion of a specific set of hills. And what's the effect of this? Stars seem to be quite amazingly huge, but when we've got something compared to like with people, it seems a little more confusing. They regard the speaker sadly, like a painting, regarding as in you might look at something and give it a regard, but also that sense of giving an emotional exploration or judgment over somebody, and that sense of scrutiny, judgment doesn't seem to come off favorably for the person speaking in the poem. And we've got this emphasized by this double whammy, sadly, and the disappointment that's coming on. So within 3 lines, we've got a combination of things such as a vagueness that's coming off from the experience of the whiteness, um, things that aren't determined, such as people or stars, and a sense that whoever is in this particular world who's speaking is not in a favorable position. And you'll notice we actually have that sort of sense of the voice coming in the 3rd line. It's not the first part of the poem. It's a sense maybe that this identity has been lost in all of this. So what way do they disappoint them? What has happened for the speaker to actually have considered this, to feel like the speaker is letting people or stars down in some way? Let's look at the next stanza. Note they're 3 lines long. The first line of it says, the train leaves a line of breath. We've got this idea of a specific thing, the train, as if it's important. And then we've got notions, again, if you note back to the first stanza, we've got the hills step, the train leaves. We're seeing this repetition of specific items at the start. And we'll also notice it's in present tense. It's happening now. It's happening in this moment. The train leaves, and then the hills step. And what's the effect of having that? You'll notice that the line of breath, and I've drawn that sort of vague, smoky signal that the train might actually have. The line of breath, the train leaving. Is the train reclining, moving away from this particular person? Is it leaving this person exposed and alone in this whiteness? Literally, we got the smoke or steam from the train. Okay, so you imagine a steam train, it's leaving, and there's a sense of that mist of the steam and smoke hanging as a kind of legacy above where the train was. We've also got this notion of the personification. In other words, the train becomes alive, and many times we do see this idea that machinery does take on a lifelike experience. Here we've got this idea that it's almost like an exhalation, breathing out. Obviously, trains don't actually breathe. This idea that we've invested in the train also perhaps heightens the sense of abandonment the speaker feels as the train has run or left the person behind. But we do have a nice visual image of the steam train, this sense of actually something quite nicely portrayed in that first line. But again, as I said before, that sense of abandonment's playing. Assonance and onomatopoeia. Assonance, the repetition of vowel sounds. Here we've got the O, slow, colour, and rust. Okay, and you'll notice I've coloured the horse, the O in horse, a different colour there. Primarily because even though it's a repetition of that sound, it doesn't give that almost heaviness to those first few O's, and even the colour is much more than the horse sound. But we've also got this almost onomatopoeia, as if like the train moving out from the station, and this sense of the piece. We've also got a sense of, obviously, if we thought about literally, we've got this horse. So you might read and go, well, is there a horse there? I suppose the potentiality in this mist world is the confusion. This notion that maybe there are animals like the sheep around, but yet we've also got this idea of a train. And you'll notice it's the horse, the color of rust. So obviously we've got this idea of this animal, this beast of burden, the train is moving along, but it's also this red color. But you'll notice along the way, it's the first time we actually have a color in the piece. So far it's been variations on white and whiteness. And here we finally have some concept of a color. But yet we do have this concept that rust, iron breaking down, the sense of something becoming reddened and browny is a sense of decay and damage that's going on. Now, at this point, we're going to end this first little study clip, and I'm going to show you the next 2 stanzas, at which point I want you just to go through the same kinds of techniques we've been looking at, single words. You'll notice that if I go back one, we have that this stanza flows over from this particular one we just looked at to the next one, so it's continued. Hooves, dolorous bells, all morning, the morning has been blackening. A flower left out, and there's a full stop there. My bones hold a stillness, the far fields melt my heart. So I'm going to finish this first clip and just consider what you can do in terms of pulling apart individual ideas, colours, emotions, the words themselves, phrases and techniques to help you pull apart this first poem, Sheep in Fog, in our scrutiny. And this ends our first clip.